Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course on recovering the operating system. I'm James Messer, and in this module, we're going to go through the requirements from our CompTIA exam 220-601, our essentials exam, section 3.3. And this is very similar to the requirements from the 220-602 exam in section 3.3, where we need to identify tools, diagnostics, procedures, and troubleshooting techniques for operating systems. We need to not only identify the boot sequences, methods, and utilities for recovering the operating systems, but we also need to know or how to demonstrate the ability to recover these operating systems. So you need to know exactly the process to go through. Even if you don't know the very specific details of what to do, you need to understand how you would step through this process. Should you run into a problem restarting the operating system, what should you do first? What should you do second? What's the third thing you should do? We'll go through that in this particular module. We'll talk about the Windows Advanced Options menu, something you've probably seen before or had to use before, but maybe didn't know it was called the Windows Advanced Option menu. In there, we're going to talk about using safe mode, using our last known good configuration and what that is. We'll talk about using an emergency repair disk, or what is now called the automated system recovery disk. And we'll also talk about and use the Windows Recovery Console. These are things that we would begin to use if we were ever in a situation where our operating system wasn't doing what we expected. Maybe it's loading a driver that's giving us a problem. Maybe it's not even starting properly. It starts the process of the operating system and then gives us some type of error. We can't even get into it to begin seeing what's going on. So what we need to do is, before we even boot the operating system, we need to somehow begin the recovery process. And we do this at boot time. When your system is starting up for the first time, before the operating system even begins to load, before you get that Windows loading screen, and you're even in the point where you even see a mouse moving, you hold down the F8 key. F8 is that secret Windows key. This brings up the Windows Advanced Options menu. Now, on most operating systems and computers these days, you have to be pretty quick because the BIOS starts up pretty quick. It begins your boot process, goes to your boot partition, and begins loading Windows. And by the time you get that Windows starting screen, then you're too late. So hitting F8, very quick that you get there immediately to see what's going on in that Advanced Options menu. You also need to see in there that there are a lot of different options. The ones we're going to focus on are the safe mode, the Windows Recovery Console, and the last known good configuration. But there's a lot of things there. Let's step through the process of starting up that Windows Advanced Options menu. It's really not hard to do at all. This is my Windows virtual machine. For those of you that have seen my videos before, you know that a lot of what we do on my front end is done in this Windows virtual machine, this VMware Workstation virtual machine. That way I can demonstrate and show a lot of different capabilities to you without actually changing a physical hard drive or changing a physical computer setting. What I'm going to do is power up this machine. The way that you do it is you hit this play button, and that virtually starts this machine up. What I'm also going to do is have my F8 key available here on my keyboard so that I can catch it very quickly once I power it on. So I'll hit the power on button, and we'll launch this virtual machine and get it going. You'll see the BIOS screen may pop up very quickly as it goes by. And then I'm holding down my F8 key and I get my Windows Advanced Options menu. Notice how quick that came up. So as I mentioned, you have to be really fast to make sure you get here. A lot of different settings on the screen. So let's go through what some of these are. You can see that the default prompt where we are now says to start Windows normally, but I'm going to arrow all the way up to the top of this. We have 3 safe modes. We're going to talk about safe mode in a moment, but this safe mode is very useful if you're running into problems during the boot process, and we'll explain why in just a bit. There's also an option to enable boot logging. If something is happening and you'd like to get a record of it, you'd like to understand where in this boot process are things really going awry, you can start this boot logging process. If you've installed new video drivers and you're finding now that you've restarted your system that you can't see anything, you may need to restart your system in a VGA mode. This is a very basic video mode so that you can then go in and perhaps uninstall those drivers or change the video configuration. There's also a last known good configuration. We'll talk more about that in a moment. There's a directory services restore mode. This is usually done in large enterprises where this is a Windows domain controller. In most cases with people's workstations, you'll never need this. There's a debugging mode that's used for people who are doing development work in the operating system, not often done at a CompTIA A+ level. And there's disable automatic restart on system failure. You'll notice if you ever have a system problem, your system may restart automatically. You may not want that. You may want the error message to stay on the screen so that you can make notes, you can make comments of what happens to be there on the screen, and be able to do more research. And that way you don't come back and think the system hasn't changed since the last time you saw it. If none of this is what we wanted to do, we can always restart Windows normally, or we can choose the reboot option to start this entire process all over again. We can, of course, always go back to our original operating system choices menu if there's one that pops up during the process of booting our system, and start as if we were beginning from the very beginning there. Now, the option that I'm interested in showing you is one about safe mode. Safe mode is one that allows you to start your system up, but what we're doing is only loading the necessary drivers to get things going. So you're only loading your keyboard, you're only loading your mouse driver, and you're only loading your video. You aren't doing a lot of different settings here. This is really useful if the problem that you have happens to be a networking driver, or happens to be a driver for a third-party piece of hardware that you just added, that now that you're starting your system, there's a problem with that driver, and now your operating system won't start. Going into that safe mode won't load that new driver, and it'll give you an opportunity to uninstall the driver now so that you can then reboot and everything will be back to normal. Now, there may be a situation where you're starting up in safe mode, but you need the network access. So you may remember from that screen we were just looking at that we can do safe mode just with networking. So that's a good option, especially if a lot of the resources you need to access are across the network. There's also a safe mode that only gives you a command prompt. So you don't get the graphical Windows Explorer. You don't get a lot of the point and click functionality. You just get a command prompt. So it's very quick, very dirty, allows you to get in. You can type in exactly what you're looking to do and then restart your system again. And finally, as I mentioned, you have that VGA mode. So if you do have a bad video driver, you can recover in those situations to get in there. When you start up safe mode, it's going to give you a message that you're in safe mode. So you'll know immediately on the screen if your safe mode worked or not. Let's start up a safe mode configuration. I'll show you what that looks like. So here's my Windows Advanced Options menu. I'm going to go all the way to the top of my safe mode and hit enter. You can see that it then takes us back to the original menu we get when we would normally start our machine. I have two options available to me, Microsoft Windows XP Professional and XP Professional with SOS. That's something that gives me a notice as things are loading. You'll also see on your screen down here at the bottom that this is going to start in safe mode. So we're already seeing a prompt that's telling us whatever you do, we're going to start it up in safe mode. Let's start up a normal configuration in Windows. Again, that SOS configuration that I've got shows me as drivers are loaded. That is also something now that's loaded when you go to safe mode. It also loads those pieces. So another way that you could start to see what's going on with different drivers. Our Windows starts up now, and you can see right across the top it says, yes, indeed, we are in safe mode, and we're running this version of Windows XP. That's not something that normally pops up whenever we're starting up Windows for the first time. And I've got a couple of different options on my screen. I can start up as my administrator or as Professor Messer. We'll start up in my normal Professor Messer account name because that's the one that I'd like to test with and look at the drivers for and see if it's working the way I would expect. As it finishes loading up, one of the things that it will tell you is that Windows is indeed running in safe mode. And this is a special diagnostics mode. We can fix problems. To proceed, click yes. If you'd like to restore to a previous state using System Restore, we can click no. What I'm going to do is click yes, just so we can see what the differences are in this desktop. And you can see this is a very basic desktop, but it tells you right away that this is the safe mode. So you'll know if you're working in your normal Windows and this safe mode happens to pop up, then something has gone awry and somehow you've managed to get yourself into a safe mode configuration. There are circumstances where Windows XP will force itself into a safe mode scenario. So if you ever see these things pop up on the screen, you'll know that something there has happened and you're now running in a safe mode. Another option we saw is this last known good configuration. This is very useful if you have made a change, and now it's not working at all. We can't go back. We've gone into safe mode. Things aren't working the way we would expect. What the last known good configuration will do is go back to the last time that you logged in when everything was working fine. So what we're going to do is find out when you logged in the last time, take that same configuration and go back in time. This can really save you should problems start to occur. You don't always have a situation where this will always work for you. So always have a plan B available to you. Last known good configuration can get you out of a jam, but it's not foolproof. What this does is when you log in each time, it makes a configuration, and that's the last known good config. A lot of people will wait, especially if they've just installed something prior to logging in. They'll just sit there and wait for something to happen. And if everything works fine, then they'll log in. That's really useful if you've done a service pack update, if you've done a set of updates that come through every month, some security patches, if you've loaded new drivers. Just wait before you log in, because that way, once you log in, your system understands there is now a new good configuration. It will use that. So if we don't log in, we still have that option to go back. This does not, by the way, save any of your application configurations. So if you've made change to your applications that perform your spreadsheets, your word processing, your video editing, and you're copying a new version of the application, and now that new application version isn't working, this won't help you. The last good configuration is only good for operating system changes with drivers, with patches, and those types of things. It's not going to help you if you've done an application install. So of course, always have a backup available. Making this last known good configuration work is very simple. We simply arrow up in our advanced options menu and we choose use the last known good configuration. I'll hit enter and you'll see one of the prompts across the bottom now is that we're going to use the last known good configuration. That sounds good with me, and we'll hit enter. That's it. There's nothing else that you have to do to have this last known good configuration take place. At this point, Windows will automatically take what it knows to be the last known good config. It will use those settings in the operating system with those drivers and those configurations, and as it starts up your Windows session, that's what it will use. The last known good configuration is very simple to use, and it's just an easy way to allow you to go back to a previous configuration. If you've loaded a new driver and it's not working, very simple way now to go back to the configuration that was running on your system prior to that installation. If you're trying to determine what to do first, what to do second, and what to do third, we're following that path. So safe mode is always a good place to start. If safe mode doesn't work, we can go back to our last known good configuration because we know that one is relatively recent and it's something that we know worked. Now, if those two just don't work and something's really gone wrong, you can revert back to a very early configuration that you set with something called the emergency repair disk in Windows 2000 or something called automated system recovery in Windows XP. You run the automated system recovery front end to make a disk in the Windows backup program. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And what that does is create a disk that we can then use to reload on top of our Windows system and repair what was there, because it will make a copy of the known good configuration onto a floppy disk. Very simple to use, very easy to use. You should of course always have a complete backup, because those automated system recovery and the emergency repair disk, they don't back up your data. They only back up the configuration of your system. So always keep in mind, you always need to have a backup, and that's done differently than our ASR or our ERD, as we call them. We create an automated system recovery disk from our backup program. So I'm going to go to the Start menu under Programs, under Accessories. This is a system tool called Backup. And you can see we're starting in the advanced mode here. I've changed my configuration to always start in the advanced mode for me. One of the reasons I did that is because one of the options at the very bottom is to create an automated system recovery view. This creates a floppy disk for us that has the system settings, and this can also create other information for us to save for later. It brings us to a wizard that says we're going to back up your system files to a disk. We'll click next, and then you can say, where do you want to store this information? Where is it located? We can say we're going to put it on this floppy drive. Notice that it will require a floppy disk. For your newer computers, you may not have a floppy disk on those, so you may want to have either a USB connected floppy or use some other method to get a floppy disk on the system. Unfortunately, the automated system recovery only uses floppy disks. That's the way it was designed to begin with. So make sure you have some way to save this information onto those floppy disks. I mentioned that using the automated system recovery function is something you should do after you've tried your safe mode, after you've tried the last known good configuration, and it really is a lot more involved to get to this point. You're going to need your Windows XP CD, your installation media, to make this work. I've now got my media in my CD-ROM drive. We're going to hit play to start our system again. And as this launches, one of the options that I get is to press any key to boot from the CD. I want to go through the normal Windows startup configuration as if I was installing the media from the very beginning. And what we're looking for is right across the bottom, it's going to say press F2 to run automated system recovery. That's exactly what I'd like to do. And as I press F2, Windows XP says, please insert the disk labeled Windows Automated System Recovery disk into the floppy drive and press a key. So this takes that information we saved before, we put our floppy disk in, and now it's going to read that configuration back into your Windows setup. It's going to put it onto the configuration of your Windows config, and now we'll be back to the original configuration whenever we made this backup to begin with. So you can see it's very, very involved. It really takes us back into the raw Windows configuration here, but it's still very simple to do. As long as you have your Windows installation media or any installation media for Windows XP around, we put it into our drive and we simply press the F2 key and Windows takes it from here. In very extreme situations where you're really doing some hardcore troubleshooting, you may be asked to use the Windows Recovery Console. The Recovery Console, it can be installed on a local machine as one of your options when you boot up, but generally it's something that's not available during the boot up process. So I'm going to show you how to do it as if it's never been installed on someone's machine before. This Recovery Console is very, very powerful. It's also very dangerous. You can delete things, you can change some configurations of your machine that might render it completely useless. However, with that power, we now have the ability to really do some interesting troubleshooting tasks. I'll show you that in just a moment. This gives you complete control of your Windows configuration. We can change things in your Windows directory. We can replace files. We can change anything that's in the root directory of your system. We can fix a lot of problems that might occur before your system starts up because we can go down to the file level in your system and be able to take advantage of this. We can change the disk configurations. We can disable services from this view. It's very handy for going in and doing some very detailed troubleshooting. And if you're somebody who's studying for your A+, you should run the Recovery Console just to get a feel for it so you'll know what situations that you're in that might make use of this Recovery Console capability. To use the Windows Recovery Console, I need the installation media. So I've put the CD-ROM in my CD-ROM drive. I'll start up my virtual machine. And what we're going to do when the prompt comes up, press any key to boot from the CD, is exactly that. I'm going to boot the Windows CD configuration. As I mentioned, someone could have already installed the ability to run the Recovery Console from their hard drive, but most of the time people don't have that configuration loaded. So the way that you do that is you load up this configuration from the CD-ROM, the installation media, as if you were installing XP for the very first time. What we're going to do is setup is going to load up the files that it needs to get started. It's going to start up and give us our first option for the menu settings. And then what we're going to choose on this screen is to repair a Windows XP installation using the Recovery Console. So it tells you on that first page, something you may not have even seen before as you were installing, because all you always did was hit enter to install your Windows XP. What we're going to do is then press the R key to repair. What Windows XP will do is tell us that this is our Recovery Console. It's going to provide system repair and recovery functionality. Type exit to quit the Recovery Console and restart the computer. Well, we're going to go ahead and continue. It's going to look through your hard drive and say that, well, you do have a Windows installation here in C:\Windows. If there's more than one Windows installation on this drive, it will tell us that as well. Since we only have the one, I'm going to type in the number 1 for the installation and hit enter. The next thing that this asks us for is the administrator password. You must have the administrator password to be able to use the Recovery Console. This is very, very important. So we must have that administrator piece. If you don't have the administrator password, you cannot use the Recovery Console. So I'll type in my administrator password, and this is what I get. Not too flashy at all. It just takes us to a command prompt. This is very similar to the command prompt you have in DOS or your command mode. This is not all of the same capabilities, though. If you type help and hit enter, you'll see that it's a limited number of functions that are available, and there are a few things in here that aren't something that you would normally find. things like being able to do disk partitioning, being able to do a listing of the services, for instance. There's a lot of different pieces in here. If you're ever trying to figure out what a command might be in the recovery console, you can do a list SVC and then a /?, and it will tell you that this is the list services command. It lists out all the available services and driver on the computer. You can also type help and the command, and it will give you the same information. So a couple of different ways to do that. So from here, I can do a list SVC. It will list out all the different services running on this computer, and I can even, from the command line, enable and disable different services from running. So if you know you've loaded a new service, you're trying to launch your system, and it's crashing every time, and it's one that's loaded during safe mode, you can start your recovery console, come in here, disable that service, and then restart your computer, and now that service won't run, and you'll be able to launch your Windows machine normally. And then once you're in at that mode, you can go in and uninstall the driver, uninstall the service, or whatever happens to be causing your problem. So you can see a lot of functionality here. Now you can also, if I hit escape, I can also do a directory of the files that are on this hard drive. I can move around the different directories. CD / takes me to the root, for instance. And here's all my root boot up files here. I can see if my NT loader is here, if my ntdetect.com is here, if my boot INI is located in the place that it should be. And if they're not here, or if I'd like to replace them, I can rename them, I can delete them, and I can copy those from another location onto this disk. So it's very useful and very functional to be able to recover from some of those very bad system problems, but hopefully something you're not going to have to use until you really, really have to. You can see Windows gives us a lot of tools available to recover the operating system. We've gone through the launching of the Windows Advanced Options menu using that F8 key, and from inside there we've been able to see how to use safe mode and how to start our last known good configuration. We've also seen, by using the Windows installation media, how we can take advantage of our emergency repair disk or our automated system recovery disk. And we've also seen how the Windows recovery console can be used to really solve the more difficult problems. For more A+ videos, to participate in our message boards and much more, you can visit our website, freeaplus.com.